Today, in part 2 of From Weird Laws to Wild Weather, 25 states with unbelievable current events, we're uncovering 25 powerful geography facts that reshape how we see America right now. These aren't the usual textbook details. Instead, 2025 data reveals shifting populations, changing climates, and even new infrastructure projects that are rewriting state identities. From extreme weather to groundbreaking industries, each fact shows how much you may have missed about these states. And just when you think you know one, the next will surprise you even more. Missouri's borders like no other. Which state manages to touch more neighbors than any other on the US map? That title belongs to Missouri, the only state that shares its borders with 8 different states. It reaches north to Iowa, stretches east to Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee, touches Arkansas to the south, Oklahoma and Kansas to the west, and even clips Nebraska. This geographic placement makes Missouri unique, almost like a crossroads drawn right into the center of the country. Its position mattered even in the 1800s. Settlers heading west rolled through Missouri on their way to new territories, while traders used its rivers to move goods both northward and down toward the Gulf of Mexico. That flow of people and products left its mark on culture and language, which are still noticeable when you compare accents from St. Louis clear across to the Ozarks. By 2025, the same central position is more crucial than ever. Freight movement data shows Missouri among the busiest corridors for trucking in the nation. Interstates linking Chicago, Denver, Dallas, and Atlanta all meet here, and rail traffic crossing the Mississippi River still funnels through key bridges in St. Louis. Without Missouri's link in the chain, the flow of food, cars, electronics, and manufactured parts would slow across much of the Midwest and South. Kansas City acts as a hub for rail and air freight, especially with modern upgrades to facilities handling agriculture exports. St. Louis, positioned on both the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, remains a critical barge port, connecting river shipping to rail and highway systems. Together, these cities make Missouri not just a connector of states, but of entire supply networks. The result goes beyond economics. Missouri straddles different identities. Southern traditions mix with Midwestern values here, affecting what people eat, how they speak, and even the kinds of laws passed near its border regions. Neighboring influences creep across invisible lines, blending customs in a way that few other states experience so broadly. The 2 great rivers running through it only reinforce the idea of centrality. Flowing water and converging roads together explain why Missouri is often described as the heartland. In many ways, the state doesn't just sit at the center of the country, it actively shapes how people and goods move across it today. Montana's wild weather and new populations. Which state can plummet from sub-zero temperatures to mild, shirt-sleeve weather faster than anywhere else in the lower 48? That's Montana. It holds the record for one of the most dramatic temperature swings ever measured in the United States, and the reason traces back to winds that sweep down from the Rockies. Known as Chinook winds, they form when moist Pacific air lifts over the mountains, dries out, and then races down the eastern slopes. That air heats rapidly as it compresses, sometimes raising the temperature of entire towns by dozens of degrees in just a single afternoon. Montanans are used to waking up with frozen car doors only to head out at lunch without a jacket. Historic records have documented changes of 40 to 50 degrees within a day, and while stories of such sudden shifts go back over a century, what's happening now shows a different trend. In 2025, climate researchers pointed out unusual data during winter months, when extreme dips were immediately followed by unusually warm spells. This isn't just the Chinook effect anymore. Longer-term warming is helping drive wider extremes that strain farms, wildlife, and infrastructure. At the same time as the weather grows less predictable, Montana is experiencing another transformation: people. After 2020, migration rolled steadily north and west. By 2025, updated census data highlighted one of the fastest percentage growth rates among smaller states. Many newcomers came searching for open landscapes, recreation, and affordability, while others arrived because remote work allowed them to escape urban costs without giving up careers. Housing demand in Missoula and Bozeman skyrocketed, Rural counties shifted from shrinking to steady growth, and school systems faced record enrollments. But there's a trade-off. The same wide-open spaces attracting remote workers are also prone to worsening wildfire seasons. Rising summer temperatures bring earlier fire starts, more smoke, and longer stretches where outdoor life becomes unsafe. Rural economies that once relied almost only on agriculture are now rebalancing between tourism, service industries, and tech-driven remote jobs. That balance is fragile where heat, drought, and sudden temperature drops are all part of the environment. Montana today illustrates something unusual, a place where one of the wildest climate ranges collides directly with one of the fastest shifts in demographics. Nebraska, the internet's hidden backbone. What connects Nebraska to the websites you click on every day or the videos you stream without interruption? The answer isn't obvious, but the state quietly hosts some of the most important fiber optic routes in the country. Nebraska's spot nearly in the geographic middle of the United States makes it a natural thoroughfare for the nation's internet backbone. For data to move between east and west coasts, it often has to pass along lines that cut directly across Nebraska's plains. What looks like farmland is actually hiding miles of high-capacity fiber cables buried just beneath the soil. That position has made Nebraska essential for internet routing. If you picture the digital map of America, much of the cross-country traffic converges here before splitting again towards Chicago, Denver, or Dallas. Because the state is flat and centrally located, it became one of the easiest places to install long-distance fiber in the 1990s, and those early advantages have compounded in 2025 as demand for bandwidth keeps rising. At the same time, Nebraska is no longer just a pass-through zone. Omaha and Lincoln now house major data centers that store and process information for banks, hospitals, and some of the world's largest technology companies. Whole warehouses packed with servers sit humming day and night, handling searches, cloud storage, and the background connections that people rely on without ever seeing. These facilities are drawn here because electricity is stable, land is affordable, and the central location reduces the distance data needs to travel. What surprises many people is how much the national economy depends on this hidden system. Online shopping, medical records, even financial trades tie back to fiber trunk lines that run below Nebraska's fields. Netflix queues, insurance claims, or airline reservations may all hop through the state before reaching servers thousands of miles away. If a line fails here, the ripple is felt nationwide. That dependence fuels concern over cybersecurity as well. Protecting these cables and giant server farms from physical tampering or digital intrusion is now a top priority. Yet for most outsiders, Nebraska still means corn, cattle, and long highways. In reality, it is one of the most critical junctions keeping America's online life connected every single day. Nevada's water crisis record. Which state depends most on every single drop of water it can hold on to? That would be Nevada, the driest state in the country. It averages less than 10 inches of rainfall each year, and that number leaves the entire population heavily dependent on outside water sources like the Colorado River. For decades, this system worked, but in 2025, updated reports showed record low inflows on the river, hitting Nevada harder than ever, especially in its fastest-growing city, Las Vegas. The river's reduced supply has pushed Lake Mead, the nation's largest reservoir, close to unprecedented lows. The surface level fell to a point where new conservation goals were set to prevent the intake pipes from becoming unusable. These limits are already causing shifts to how much water neighborhoods, casinos, and industries can draw, with restrictions rolling out in stages to keep the system functioning. For the state, the crisis is not a distant threat. It is a reality taking shape every year as the lake drops further. Yet in the middle of this stress, Nevada has managed to set records in conservation. In 2025, Las Vegas reported the highest percentage of indoor wastewater recycled of any U.S. metro area. Nearly every gallon entering homes or hotels is treated and returned for reuse. Beyond that, the state has expanded research into solar-driven desalination projects, aiming to turn brackish or underground water into usable supplies at lower energy costs. Residents are part of this shift, too. Average household water use in southern Nevada has dropped by more than half compared to levels from just a couple of decades ago. Officials enforce strict turf removal programs, banning grass lawns in many new developments, while communities are investing in desert landscaping that thrives on minimal irrigation. Agriculture, once thought unsustainable here, is also adapting. Farmers use advanced drip systems and switch to crops like alfalfa varieties bred to need less water. Even experimental desert greenhouses powered by solar energy are beginning to show promise. The contrast is clear. Behind the bright images of Las Vegas casinos is a region living under extreme water pressure. Nevada shows that the same place facing one of America's worst water shortages is also leading in the most advanced urban conservation solutions today. New Hampshire, no sales tax, big moves. Why are so many families looking north when deciding where to settle in New England? The explanation ties closely to New Hampshire's long-standing rule that sets it apart. It imposes no general sales tax. While many states across the region rely on this revenue stream, New Hampshire has chosen to forgo it entirely. That decision influences how people shop, where they choose to locate businesses, and ultimately where households decide to move. In 2025, this policy is no longer just a curiosity. It has become a major driver of migration patterns. The biggest shift is happening along the southern border. Residents of Massachusetts, where the tax burden is higher, have been crossing north in noticeable waves. Families balancing budgets see immediate appeal in making large purchases free from sales tax, from household goods to vehicles. Businesses also recognize the advantage, opening locations in New Hampshire to attract customers from across the state line. This steady pull is reflected in updated 2025 migration tallies, which show that New Hampshire is one of the fastest-growing states in the region. The numbers connect directly to affordability. Comparisons between Boston suburbs and southern New Hampshire reveal clear cost differences, and new residents are seizing the opportunity. Commuter rail links and expanded highway access make it easy for workers to hold jobs in Massachusetts while living on the New Hampshire side. As a result, towns near Nashua and Salem have seen record growth, with housing developments spreading into once rural areas. That sprawl comes with consequences. For decades, New Hampshire's towns experienced stable populations and relatively modest home costs. In 2025, inventory shortages and strong demand have fueled climbing prices, creating competition in areas that were once quiet. Longtime residents sometimes express frustration at rapid change, while policymakers face pressure to address affordability without discarding the very tax structure that drew newcomers in the first place. New Hampshire's political identity signals why the tradition holds. The motto, "Live free or die," is more than a slogan. It reflects the state's consistent resistance to certain forms of taxation. That image of independence continues to resonate with both residents and migrants. It also helps explain why, even as challenges build, the flow of newcomers shows no sign of slowing. In fact, the state's refusal to impose a sales tax remains one of the strongest magnets pulling people north in 2025. New Jersey, most crowded square mile. The most crowded state in America is not New York or California, it's New Jersey. By 2025, population counts show more than 1,300 people living on every square mile of its land. While small in size, the state holds nearly 9 million residents, and the space between them keeps shrinking. This density reshapes everything from housing to transportation and shows how urban expansion blurs lines between long-standing suburbs and growing cities. The reason goes beyond just being close to New York City and Philadelphia. Over time, individual towns have grown outward until they connect directly with neighboring communities, leaving fewer open areas in between. The suburban image still exists, with single-family homes and tree-lined streets, but they often sit just minutes away from crowded highways, apartment towers, and corporate campuses. By 2025, the overlap is so complete that traditional divisions between urban and suburban have faded in many parts of New Jersey. One of the most visible signs of this change appears along the Hudson waterfront. Jersey City, for example, has undergone extensive redevelopment, adding sleek residential towers, shopping areas, and direct transit access to Manhattan. These projects have drawn thousands of new residents seeking lower housing costs while staying within reach of New York. Along the same shoreline, smaller cities like Hoboken and Weehawken continue to add dense mixed-use blocks that make the whole stretch look more like an extension of New York's urban zone. But this growth creates strain. Public transit systems such as NJ Transit and the PATH trains already handle heavy passenger loads, and demand in 2025 has stretched schedules close to their limits. Road networks, including the Turnpike and Garden State Parkway, see some of the highest congestion levels in the nation. Even schools and local services feel the weight of rapid expansion, pushing state planners to consider new infrastructure investment. Despite the pressures, density has also created surprising cultural richness. Large immigrant communities from Latin America, South Asia, and beyond have shaped neighborhoods across the state. This blending is visible in markets, restaurants, and festivals, making New Jersey both highly urban in character yet still suburban in lifestyle. In 2025, that mix defines what it means to live in the densest state in America. New Mexico, launchpad to space. Which state might send your next vacation into orbit? That would be New Mexico, where the space industry has taken off in ways that almost no one predicted a generation ago. By 2025, the state has shifted from being thought of largely as desert landscapes and historic pueblos to playing a central role in the global space economy. The centerpiece of this change is Spaceport America, located near the town of Truth or Consequences. Built for commercial spaceflight, the facility has now reached a record number of launches in 2025, hosting everything from private tourism flights to tests for future satellite systems. The reason New Mexico works so well for space isn't just open land. Its high elevation, low humidity, and more than 300 days of clear skies each year make it close to ideal for testing rocket engines and launching spacecraft. Without constant cloud cover or the risk of heavy storms, schedules can stay on track far more reliably than in coastal sites. Companies designing rockets and satellites save both time and money by utilizing conditions that reduce delays. Private space firms have now set their sights on the region in a serious way. In 2025, companies testing suborbital rockets, reusable vehicles, and high-altitude systems all logged important milestones at the site. For some, these launches are steps toward getting paying tourists into space for the first time, while others are building platforms to deliver satellites faster and at lower cost. Each test doesn't just advance engineering, it draws international attention to a state that historically ranked low on economic charts. Tourism itself has become part of the equation. Visitors planning trips to southern New Mexico now include the chance to watch launches as an attraction alongside visiting places like White Sands. Hotels and restaurants in nearby towns see direct results, and guided tour of the spaceport add new revenue streams that didn't exist 10 years ago. New Mexico also connects this modern surge to its scientific legacy. Los Alamos and Sandia National Labs, long recognized for research in physics and defense, feed expertise and talent into the industry. While the state has faced challenges like high poverty rates, the space sector represents a new level of opportunity. New Mexico is quickly establishing itself as the unlikely home base for the next stage of the space race. New York subway's modern milestone. What city's lifeline is moving more in 2025 than it has in over a decade? The answer is New York, where the subway system has reached its highest ridership since the pandemic years. Millions of riders pour through its stations each day, and updated statistics show that use has climbed steadily back to levels not seen since the late 2010s. For a system that carried the weight of recovery after years of empty trains, this milestone is a sign of the city finding its rhythm again. The subway in 2025 is also different from the one most people remember. Modernized train cars now make up a growing share of the rolling stock, with digital displays, wider doorways, and improved accessibility. Several long-discussed line extensions are finally underway, including projects that connect far-flung neighborhoods more directly to job centers in Manhattan. Riders boarding today are stepping into a network that is part modern rebuild, part century-old backbone. But the system remains vulnerable to forces far beyond its control. Climate change has turned storms into larger threats for underground tunnels, where even a few inches of floodwater can disrupt entire boroughs. Hurricane events over the past decade showed how quickly water can overwhelm pumps. In response, new barriers and upgraded tunnel protection have been installed along key entry points, designed to keep storm surges from doing the damage they once did. Scale adds another dimension. The New York City subway remains the largest rapid transit system in the world by number of stations, with close to 6 million riders using it on an average weekday in 2025. That massive flow of people makes it the single most important factor in how the city moves. Without it, entire streets would lock in gridlock. Funding has poured in to meet this demand. Billions of dollars from state budgets and federal support went into increasing capacity and adding safety features, but these investments do not erase every problem. Costs for projects are among the highest anywhere, service delays still frustrate commuters, and maintaining reliability with aging infrastructure continues to be a daily challenge. In 2025, the subway reflects New York's contradictions: expensive yet essential, unreliable at times yet utterly irreplaceable. It remains both a heavy burden to operate and at the same time, the heartbeat of the city's economy. North Carolina, the expanding triangle. What place is becoming America's next Silicon Valley? In 2025, many experts point to North Carolina's Research Triangle, the region anchored by Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. Originally known for its universities, the triangle has grown into one of the country's fastest-rising technology hubs, drawing major corporations, new startups, and large sums of investment capital. The numbers highlight the scale. Thousands of new jobs have arrived since 2020, and updated data for 2025 shows tech firms expanding faster here than in many larger metro areas. Companies in software, cloud computing, pharmaceuticals, and biotechnology now cluster around the region. Several high-profile headquarters relocations have been announced in the past year alone, solidifying the Triangle's reputation as a serious player in technology and life sciences. For workers, the influx has meant greater employment options paired with a cost of living that remains lower than traditional innovation centers. Biomedicine has positioned itself alongside information technology. Durham's long tradition of pharmaceutical research has attracted global companies to establish or expand facilities. Labs around the Triangle now employ thousands of scientists and technicians, placing the region in direct competition with Boston and San Diego for research dominance. New investments in health data and biotechnology are connecting with Raleigh's growing tech workforce to form cross-industry partnerships that wouldn't have been possible a generation ago. The rapid pace of growth, however, is straining infrastructure. Housing demand is pushing prices higher, and once quiet neighborhoods around Chapel Hill and Raleigh now see construction cranes and new subdivisions. Transit proposals are back on the table to ease commuting pressures, though decisions on funding remain debated. Local governments face constant questions about how to keep public services, roads, and utilities in step with the region's swelling population. The reason this transformation took root is the universities. North Carolina State, Duke, and the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill continue to anchor the region with research, talent pipelines, and steady federal funding. Their graduates fuel new companies, while their labs spin research into industry partnerships. This part of the South, once known for agriculture, now attracts global innovation while dealing with hotter summers and storm resilience planning. Together, those shifts show how North Carolina is reshaping itself into a high-tech powerhouse. North Dakota, oil and economics revamped. Which small state has such an influence over global oil prices that traders actually watch its production reports? That is North Dakota, a place whose wells in the Bakken Shale Formation changed world markets over the past decade. The surge in hydraulic fracturing once pushed output so high that the state rivaled countries in daily production. But in 2025, the story looks different. Analysts mark this year as a turning point, where growth has slowed and plateaued, showing how shale fields are reaching new phases after rapid expansion. The 2025 data signals that North Dakota's oil production peaked differently than many expected. Instead of climbing year after year, extraction levels have steadied, shaped by market demand, drilling costs, and global supply chains. The massive wave of drilling rigs seen early in the 2010s has transformed into a more cautious development strategy, with companies focusing on efficient operations rather than non-stop expansion. This stabilizing of production reflects not just geology, but also economics, as new wells must compete with an energy sector that is embracing alternatives. That leads to the state's newer focus, renewable energy. While oil still dominates, investments in wind power have expanded across the western prairies. In 2025, turbines generate a growing share of North Dakota's electricity portfolio, showing how an economy once tied to a single commodity is building a second foundation. Balancing oil with renewables is not easy, but forward policies and federal incentives are steering companies toward dual energy models. Local communities feel these changes directly. During the peak oil rush, boomtowns like Williston doubled in population almost overnight, filling motels and trailers with workers. Housing shortages and rapid construction defined that era. Now, in 2025, many of those towns have stabilized. Populations hold steadier, job markets diversify, and services expand to meet not just oilfield demand, but broader industries like manufacturing and logistics. Despite diversification, energy still accounts for thousands of jobs, from extraction crews on rigs to engineers managing pipelines and power plants. Farmers share land with drilling pads, while transport networks move both crops and crude side by side. What happens here doesn't stay here. North Dakota's supply changes affect global oil prices, meaning fluctuations on its prairies ripple across stock markets worldwide. The state is redefining its energy identity, moving beyond the single rush that once defined it. 12. Ohio, still the election swing king. What state is still watched more closely than almost any other when Americans head to the polls? That state is Ohio, where presidential elections have long been shaped by its shifting political loyalties. For decades, Ohio carried the reputation of a bellwether, a place where outcomes often mirrored the national result. From 1964 through 2016, the candidate who won Ohio almost always secured the presidency, cementing its image as a decisive swing state. In 2025, that label is more complicated, but the state still holds a crucial position in American politics. Recent demographic shifts show how its political balance is changing. Urban centers such as Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati lean differently from the wide rural counties surrounding them. Data from 2025 highlights this split clearly. Cities add younger, more diverse populations, while much of rural Ohio continues to hold older residents who vote in higher proportions. Those divergent patterns make elections here less predictable and keep attention fixed on the state every 4 years. Generational divides add another layer. Younger voters in Ohio focus on issues like education affordability and climate resilience, while older generations prioritize jobs tied to industry and energy. These differences create a patchwork where counties only an hour apart can swing sharply in opposite directions. Campaign strategies must therefore stretch across an unusually wide spectrum of interests, unlike in states with more uniform voting blocks. Columbus stands out in this picture. It is one of the fastest-growing cities in the Midwest, bringing in workers through its expanding tech and healthcare sectors. This rapid growth injects new voters with different priorities into statewide totals, changing the balance that once leaned more predictably. Columbus is also surrounded by suburban counties that shift frequently, making the metro region one of the most closely analyzed electoral areas in the nation. Ohio blends industrial roots, sprawling farmland, and modern innovation. That mix represents a miniature version of the larger U.S. electorate, which is why its results still attract such close scrutiny. Even though some analysts argue it is not as decisive as it once was, Ohio continues to signal how urban growth, rural stability, and generational change play out in national elections. Oklahoma, from tornadoes to tremors. Why is Oklahoma not only storm-prone, but also quake-prone? The answer goes beyond geography and ties directly to human activity. For years, the state became known not just for its place in Tornado Alley, but also for an unusual rise in earthquakes. Unlike the West Coast, these tremors were not linked to natural fault systems alone. They were connected to energy production, specifically the disposal of wastewater from hydraulic fracturing operations, which altered the pressure deep underground. In the mid-2010s, Oklahoma went from recording only a handful of small quakes each year to experiencing hundreds, some strong enough to damage buildings. Communities in central Oklahoma, including towns near Stillwater and Guthrie, felt shaking regularly. Residents were startled to find themselves living with more earthquakes than California in some years. The direct cause traced back to wastewater injection wells tied to shale oil production. By pumping millions of gallons of fluid at high pressure deep into rock formations, these wells triggered stress on existing faults and created frequent tremors. By 2025, the picture looks different. Updated seismic data shows the number of earthquakes has decreased compared to peak years, but the risk hasn't disappeared. State regulations place stricter limits on the depth and volume of wastewater disposal. Companies are required to monitor seismic activity and reduce injection rates if tremors increase. These policies have helped lower the frequency of stronger quakes, though small ones still occur often enough to remind people of the unusual link between drilling and shaking ground. The double challenge for Oklahoma remains evident. While quakes are a more recent problem, tornadoes are a long-standing fact of life, with an average of 68 striking the state each year. Emergency programs now combine readiness for both hazards, with updated statewide initiatives that train schools, businesses, and local governments to respond quickly whether the threat comes from the sky or beneath the soil. In rural areas, recovery can be harder due to limited infrastructure, while cities like Oklahoma City have invested more resources into resilience. Still, residents across the state have adapted, balancing agricultural life, energy development, and disaster preparedness. Oklahoma today lives with storms not just sweeping above, but also shaking below. Oregon, still pumping gas differently. Why are Oregonians still not pumping their own gas? The answer lies in one of the state's quirkiest laws, a rule that for decades made Oregon one of the only places in the country where drivers were not allowed to touch the pump. Since 1951, state law required full-service fueling, meaning attendants handled every transaction. While travelers often found it unusual, for locals it became part of daily life, shaping how gas stations operated and how people thought about something as ordinary as filling a car. The original reasons for the ban were practical. Legislators worried about safety hazards from open flames, gasoline vapors, and distracted drivers managing their own fueling. At the same time, the rule ensured steady employment for station workers who provided service the moment a driver pulled in. Those protections over time became identity. People in Oregon grew used to attendants helping with tanks, windshields, and even quick directions for travelers. Full service became familiar and expected rather than seen as outdated. By 2023, pressure for change rose. Rural lawmakers pointed out long wait times in smaller towns where stations sometimes struggled to find enough workers to cover shifts. In response, the state allowed partial self-service in certain rural areas, letting drivers fuel themselves during off-peak hours. By 2025, the amendments expanded further, bringing limited self-service options across more parts of the state while still preserving jobs in busier areas. That shift sparked debate. On one side, station attendants and their supporters warned that automation would cut jobs and hurt communities relying on those wages. On the other, drivers and many younger residents argued that modernization was overdue, especially when every state around Oregon already permitted it. Both points carried weight, reflecting a larger struggle between tradition and efficiency. Culturally, the law remains significant. Gas station attendants became a fixture in Oregon, and many residents still prefer being served. Only Oregon and New Jersey resisted self-service fueling for so long, which distinguished them nationally. Even as rules loosen, Oregon's fueling habits continue to stand out. showing how a small daily act on the road can carry surprising weight in a state's character. Pennsylvania, past and present colliding. Which state manages to balance some of the nation's most important beginnings with one of today's largest infrastructure recoveries? That would be Pennsylvania. It is home to Independence Hall in Philadelphia, where the Declaration of Independence and Constitution were debated and signed. Tourists from across the country visit the cobblestone streets around the Liberty Bell and Carpenters Hall, making the state's connection to America's founding impossible to overlook. Yet the Pennsylvania of 2025 is also heavily focused on rebuilding, with roads, bridges, and rail lines undergoing major upgrades after decades of aging conditions. This year, many of those long-discussed projects are finally underway. Federal funds and state initiatives are being used to repair hundreds of structurally deficient bridges spread across the Commonwealth. Some of these spans carry interstate traffic over the Susquehanna and Delaware rivers, and their rebuilds are key to national freight corridors. In addition to highways, Amtrak improvements stand out. Renovations on routes linking Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh now offer faster travel east to the Mid-Atlantic and west toward the Midwest. Freight rail systems connecting steel towns along the Ohio River are also being modernized, giving Pennsylvania a renewed role as a national connector. The state's economy highlights contrasts between old and new. Philadelphia continues to draw heritage tourism as visitors walk through historic sites where the United States first defined its independence. At the same time, Pittsburgh seeks recognition for its growing robotics and technology sector built on top of a steel-making tradition. 2025 developments show how both cities shape Pennsylvania's identity, one grounded in history and the other in future-focused commerce. Another dividing line comes from its energy story. Coal built many of the towns across western Pennsylvania, but a gradual shift toward renewables has forced difficult choices. Solar installations and wind farms now cover parts of rural counties, a sharp reversal from the black lung mining era, though the cultural memory of coal remains strong. That ongoing mix, keeping historic identity intact while adapting to new demands, defines much of the political and economic debate. Pennsylvania sits at the meeting point of the nation's past and its reconstruction. Where American independence began is also where infrastructure and logistics are being remade in 2025. Rhode Island, small, shrinking, and surprising. Which state could fit inside Texas more than 220 times, yet still faces the problem of losing parts of its land? That is Rhode Island, the smallest state in the country, with an area of about 1,214 square miles. Its size often surprises people, since the entire state is only a short drive from end to end. Despite that limited footprint, it faces one of the greatest risks of losing ground due to coastal erosion and sea level rise. Updated maps in 2025 reveal just how much shoreline has been shifting. Some of the state's iconic stretches of beach have retreated significantly over the past decade. Narragansett and Misquamicut, known both for local tourism and summer housing communities, now show marked land loss on erosion studies. A combination of stronger storms and consistent wave action is cutting into the coast at faster rates than seen in previous generations. Scientists have highlighted how the pace of retreat could shrink usable land year by year, a difficult trend for such a small state to manage. Storm surge adds to the risk. Rhode Island's location on the Atlantic leaves it exposed during nor'easters and hurricanes, which drive seawater inland. Even moderate storms now push water levels far enough to flood roads, damage dunes, and threaten neighborhoods perched just behind the beaches. Because nearly 1/3 of the state's total territory is already covered by water, losing coastline magnifies the pressure on remaining dry land. For people living close to the shore, the impacts are personal. Homes built decades ago are now far closer to the waterline, with some owners facing regular flooding during seasonal high tides. Insurance costs have climbed, and local governments have flagged neighborhoods for future buyouts if erosion continues. With newcomers still drawn to housing near the ocean, decisions about building and rebuilding sit directly at the center of community debates. Policy responses have started, though they vary. Efforts include shoreline restoration projects, dune rebuilding, and experimental seawalls designed to block wave action. Barriers are being tested around harbors to reduce damage during high-surge events. These measures help, but they do not erase the central concern that Rhode Island, already the smallest state, could see its usable size shrink even further within our lifetimes. South Carolina, bracing for storms. Which southern coast is busiest for hurricanes in 2025? The answer points to South Carolina, a state that sits directly in the path of frequent Atlantic storms and now ranks as one of the most vulnerable stretches of shoreline on the East Coast. The challenge isn't just the strength of individual hurricanes, it's the sheer number of near misses and landfalls that force communities here to keep emergency systems on permanent alert. In 2025, South Carolina has poured enormous resources into preparing for those storms in ways that are reshaping both infrastructure and culture. Across the state, evacuation planning has been upgraded with new digital tools. Predictive models allow officials to measure potential storm surges down to specific neighborhoods, which guides decision-making on when to move people inland. These models make use of real-time ocean and atmospheric data, helping state agencies time evacuation orders with more precision. That accuracy matters when millions of people in Charleston, Myrtle Beach, and smaller coastal towns have only narrow windows to reach safety. The adaptations extend beyond evacuation maps. Columbia and Charleston have invested billions of dollars in seawalls, pumps, and drainage revamps designed to combat rising water. Charleston, in particular, has begun massive drainage tunnel projects to redirect floodwater away from historic neighborhoods. In these areas, centuries-old brick streets, churches, and homes face direct threats from both heavy rains and storm surges. Protecting sites tied to the earliest colonial history of the South has become as much a cultural issue as an engineering one. The data makes clear why urgency is so high. Sea levels along South Carolina's coast are rising faster than the national average, leaving communities more exposed to high tides even without a hurricane present. By 2025, residents already notice so-called sunny day flooding when seawater pushes into downtown streets during otherwise calm weather. At the same time, the coastline's population continues to grow. Families and retirees drawn by beaches and affordability add to the numbers who must leave during each evacuation, which strains highways and shelters. That contrast, an attractive tourist paradise also sitting in one of the country's most storm-prone zones, means South Carolina is building the newest climate response playbook for America. South Dakota, tourism and stone faces. Which state's tourism depends on giant carved mountains? That would be South Dakota, where Mount Rushmore continues to serve as the anchor for millions of annual visitors. The towering granite faces of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln are instantly recognizable worldwide, but the effort to keep them intact is far costlier and more complex than most travelers realize. Weathering, cracks, and constant exposure to wind and snow force ongoing preservation projects that demand both money and technology. In 2025, visitor numbers to Mount Rushmore surged higher than at any point since the pandemic years. Crowds returned in record strength, with updated tallies showing several million people arriving to walk the Presidential Trail, tour the museums, and attend night lighting ceremonies. Managing this level of tourism means nearby towns like Keystone and Rapid City have expanded accommodations, restaurants, and parking facilities to handle traffic that can clog narrow mountain roads during peak summer months. To protect the monument itself, engineers rely on new scanning technology. High-resolution 3D models now track the smallest fractures in the granite, allowing preservation crews to seal or monitor problem areas before they become severe. Advances in drone imaging also allow inspections that once required climbers to scale the rock directly. Without these tools, the harsh freeze-thaw cycles of the Black Hills could cause deterioration far faster than tourism would ever allow. Beyond Rushmore, South Dakota's famous landscapes add to its draw. The rugged terrain of Badlands National Park and the forested Black Hills draw hikers, photographers, and road trippers seeking experiences that often pair with a Rushmore visit. In these areas, tourism agencies report a steady rise in coordinated trips, where travelers split their days between natural wonders and the iconic man-made mountain carving. What makes these numbers striking is the state's small population. Fewer than 1 million residents live in South Dakota, yet millions of outsiders arrive every year. Native American heritage sites are increasingly highlighted as part of the experience as well, including the Crazy Horse Memorial, which adds cultural depth to the region's tourism story. In 2025, South Dakota proves how a small state can carry a truly colossal tourism impact. Tennessee, music and money. Which state profits the most from its musical roots? The answer is Tennessee, where the music industry now generates more than $10 billion a year, according to 2025 reports. This is not just about famous venues or big-name stars. It is an entire economy built on recording studios, publishing rights, tourism, and the service sectors that feed into them. Music here is both heritage and a high-value business. Nashville often takes the spotlight, and for good reason. It has become one of the largest recording centers in the world, attracting not only country artists, but performers across every genre. The concentration of songwriters, labels, and live stages marks the city as a global cultural brand. Recording sessions that take place in a Nashville studio can drive royalties for years, and the cluster of talent continues to draw investment from abroad. By 2025, live music events and award shows in Nashville bring in millions of visitors annually, each leaving a measurable impact on the local economy. Memphis holds its ground with a different legacy. Known as the birthplace of blues and rock and roll, it keeps attracting fans from around the world who want to walk Beale Street, step into historic studios, and visit museums dedicated to legends tied to the city's roots. Tourism in Memphis feeds directly into hotels, restaurants, and airlines, showing how cultural memory translates into recurring revenue streams. This steady flow of spending does not stop at city limits. The music industry in Tennessee spreads its benefits outward. Festivals in smaller towns, regional studios, and expanding performance venues prove that economic gains reach beyond Nashville and Memphis. Local governments now back programs that help developing musicians find training and financial support, ensuring a pipeline of talent that strengthens the industry statewide. Balancing history with innovation remains critical. Preserving iconic venues and celebrating heritage attracts visitors, but modern genres and experimental sounds keep the state's music scene alive for new generations. The two poles, tradition and creativity, work side by side, fueling jobs at every level. Tennessee demonstrates in 2025 that music is more than culture. It is one of the state's most powerful megabusinesses. Texas, the giant energy player. Which state alone can outproduce entire continents when it comes to energy? That state is Texas. In 2025, it remains the largest fossil fuel producer in the United States by a wide margin. Crude oil fields in the Permian Basin still rank among the most productive on Earth, while natural gas from the Eagle Ford and Barnett shales continues to feed pipelines that stretch across the country. This single state produces more energy than many nations, and its scale makes it central to both American markets and global supply chains. But the story no longer stops with oil and gas. By 2025, Texas has also become the top state for renewable energy adoption. Wind farms sprawl across the plains of West Texas, generating more electricity than any other state. The region's steady winds and wide open spaces make it perfectly suited for turbines that now feed gigawatts into the power grid. Alongside that, solar power has surged at an even faster pace. Panels blanket rooftops, and large-scale solar parks stretch over desert land in South and Central Texas. Growth here has been strong enough to break national records in installed capacity, giving Texas a surprising second title as the renewable energy leader. These forms of energy coexist rather than replace each other. Oil pump jacks operate just miles from fields of wind turbines, and solar panels share power lines with natural gas plants. Few places illustrate the overlap between legacy energy and the energy transition as clearly as Texas. The coexistence is also practical. Fossil fuels still supply global demand, while renewables strengthen domestic electricity stability. The grid itself has become a major focus. After statewide blackouts in earlier years, 2025 brought significant investment into modernizing transmission lines, building new storage systems, and upgrading connections across regions. These improvements made headlines nationwide because reliability remains essential when balancing such a diverse mix of resources. The debate continues over whether Texas can maintain its economy while lowering emissions, but the pattern is clear. A state once defined almost entirely by oil is now recognized as a leader across all forms of energy, shaping the country's future while still fueling the present. Utah parks under pressure. Which state has to rethink how many tourists it lets in? That would be Utah, where national parks have become so popular that visitation levels in 2025 reached new records. Zion, Arches, and Bryce Canyon each reported millions of entries, stretching their landscapes and facilities further than ever before. These parks remain some of the most recognizable natural landmarks in the U.S., but their success means the number of visitors now threatens the very features that draw people in. The scale of the crowds cannot be ignored. Zion National Park, for example, recorded entire days where shuttle services and parking lots filled before mid-morning. Arches, with its world-famous stone formations, has implemented timed reservation entries to keep overflow traffic from backing up into neighboring towns. Even Bryce Canyon, once considered more remote, now sees international travel groups arriving by the busload during peak weeks. The draw of Utah's red rock landscapes has grown stronger every year, and 2025 marked a point where restrictions became less a proposal and more a necessity. Park rangers now balance two competing goals. On one side, tourism revenue brings hundreds of millions of dollars into the state. Businesses in Moab, Springdale, and Kanab depend on steady flows of hikers, photographers, and campers. On the other, the fragile desert environment often carries scars long after the visitors leave. Soil crusts, once undisturbed for centuries, are crushed under heavy foot traffic. Trails erode faster, and some areas have developed barren patches where plant growth struggles to return. Because of this wear, conservation crews have started rewilding, closing off sections of trail and reseeding them with native plants to restore stability. The effort is not just local. Scientists around the world study Utah's geology because its terrain mirrors conditions on Mars. Rock layers and desert formations provide insights that space researchers use to understand planetary surfaces. Even as tourists crowd in to take photos, geologists and NASA teams quietly collect data for missions into the future. Utah in 2025 shows how natural beauty, financial dependence, and scientific importance all intersect. The state's parks highlight the ongoing tension between preserving extraordinary landscapes while still welcoming the world to experience them. Vermont sugar and survival. Which state produces most of America's maple syrup, yet worries about the future of the very trees that make it possible? That is Vermont, where sugar maples dominate both the forests and the state's cultural identity. As of 2025, Vermont still leads the country in syrup production by a wide margin, providing close to half of all U.S. output. For generations, tapping maple trees in late winter marked the rhythm of rural life in the state, and families passed down sugaring practices as both tradition and business. The process relies heavily on temperature. Syrup season begins when nights fall below freezing but daytime highs rise above that mark. This freeze-thaw cycle causes sap to flow, which is then collected and boiled into syrup. In Vermont, this cycle has always been most reliable in March and April, giving producers a predictable window of several weeks. But now warmer winters are shortening that period. Updated figures from 2025 show that the sap run often ends earlier than expected, with some producers losing valuable weeks of collection compared to historic averages. That shift poses serious risks for the state's economy and culture. Maple syrup doesn't just represent breakfast tables, it drives farms, creates seasonal jobs, and attracts visitors. Vermont syrup sales generate hundreds of millions of dollars, and small towns rely on those earnings. If tapping seasons shrink further, both revenues and traditions will suffer. Families who have harvested sap for decades already report that unpredictable weather makes long-term planning uncertain. Researchers in the state are working on adaptation measures. Experimental forest management includes planting sugar maples at higher elevations, where cooler conditions might extend the sap cycle. Other projects involve crossbreeding trees that can tolerate warmer winters. While these efforts show promise, they face the challenge of time. Trees take decades to mature, so changes today won't be fully tested for years. Despite the challenges, syrup remains a visible part of Vermont's public life. Annual maple festivals continue to draw tourists, and sugar houses invite visitors to watch boiling demonstrations each spring. Yet behind the celebrations is a recognition that climate change is pressing hard on the tradition. In 2025, syrup remains Vermont's soul, but warming winters threaten the state's sweetest lifeline. Virginia Tech Corridor boom. Which state's quiet suburban zones became global data hubs? That is Virginia, where northern counties once known for farmland now sit at the center of the world's digital networks. By 2025, the region just outside Washington, D.C. has expanded into one of the fastest-growing technology corridors anywhere. Rows of sprawling server warehouses have turned suburbs into the backbone of how billions of people connect to the internet every day. Loudoun County stands at the heart of this change. It contains the highest density of data centers on the planet, with entire industrial parks filled with windowless server buildings. These centers store and move the cloud-based information that powers everything from online search engines to streaming services. In 2025, new reports estimate that more than two-thirds of the world's internet traffic passes through facilities here at some point, making this quiet corner of Virginia far more globally important than it looks on a map. Investment has only accelerated. Billions of dollars are being poured into expansion projects to meet demand from cloud computing giants. Every new facility requires massive amounts of fiber optic connectivity, high-powered cooling, and security measures, which means construction jobs and long-term technical positions continue to multiply. Around the same zones, defense contractors and cybersecurity firms cluster as well, taking advantage of proximity to both the data infrastructure and the federal agencies across the Potomac. With this growth comes strain. Server farms consume enormous amounts of electricity, creating a demand spike that stresses existing grids. To meet this need, utilities and local governments are investing heavily in renewable energy. Solar farms and offshore wind projects are increasingly tied to data centers, showing how the digital industry is now driving regional energy planning. The corridor's growth also affects daily life. Housing prices in counties such as Loudoun, Fairfax, and Prince William have surged as demand for workers pulls new residents into the area. Once sleepy subdivisions have turned into competitive real estate markets linked directly to the global data economy. Virginia may not carry the image of Silicon Valley, but in 2025, it serves as the unseen headquarters of the digital world. Washington, coffee and code. Which state drinks coffee like water and codes the future? That would be Washington, where two of its most defining exports are caffeine and technology. The Seattle area has long been recognized as a center of coffee culture, with thousands of cafes scattered across the city. From global companies launching their first shops downtown to independent roasters developing neighborhood followings, coffee has shaped both daily routines and the city's image. Residents often joke that a coffee shop sits on nearly every corner, and the data supports it. Per capita, Washington ranks among the very highest in the nation for coffee consumption. By 2025, the same region that thrives on espresso also leads the world in tech innovation. Companies like Microsoft and Amazon continue to anchor Washington's economy, each contributing billions in exports through cloud services, software, and e-commerce. Their global footprint extends far beyond state borders, making Seattle's metropolitan area one of the most influential hubs for modern computing. Newer firms in aerospace design, biotechnology, and gaming have added to the mix, ensuring that Washington's digital economy keeps expanding. What connects these two industries is more than coincidence. Coffee culture sustains the creative workforce that codes and engineers late into the night. Many small businesses, from independent cafes to boutique roasters, benefit directly from the steady demand of tech employees looking for places to work, meet, or pause between projects. In turn, that culture reinforces the sense that innovation and lifestyle can thrive together in the same city. The reach of this synergy spreads well outside of Seattle. Smaller towns across Washington also support local coffee roasters, while contractors, coders, and digital service firms plug into Seattle's global network remotely. The influence of Washington's brands, both coffee and tech, regularly exceeds the size of the state itself, shaping international habits and industries despite its modest population compared to coastal giants like California. Rapid growth does create challenges. In 2025, housing affordability in the Seattle metro remains one of the region's most pressing issues, with high rents tied directly to the presence of tech giants. Still, Washington's mix of caffeine and code continues to power both its culture and its economy at the same time. West Virginia, population decline continues. Which state is shrinking fastest in terms of people? That would be West Virginia, where updated 2025 population figures show the decline continuing year after year. The state has consistently recorded more residents moving out than moving in, a trend that has placed it at the bottom of national growth rankings. With fewer births and aging populations, West Virginia faces the challenge of losing both its workforce and its younger generations at the same time. The roots of this pattern stretch back decades. Coal once supported entire counties, providing stable jobs across Appalachia. When global energy markets shifted and coal demand shrank, thousands of positions disappeared. Communities that had relied almost entirely on mining suddenly faced unemployment on a large scale. Young residents responded by leaving in search of work and education in neighboring states. This outmigration created a cycle. Fewer young families meant fewer children and schools facing closures, which only accelerated the decline. Traveling through rural areas today, it is common to find towns with empty storefronts and falling populations. In once busy mining hubs, downtown districts now show more vacant buildings than active businesses. Local governments work with limited tax bases, making it harder to provide public services. Still, there are efforts underway to reverse these patterns. The state has launched campaigns to draw in remote workers attracted by low costs, fast internet in select counties, and easy access to outdoor recreation. Outdoor tourism has become one of the stronger points of focus. The New River Gorge, recently named a national park, pulls in visitors for climbing, rafting, and hiking. State leaders hope that turning natural beauty into an economic draw will both bring in tourists and convince some to stay permanently. Yet, while tourism brings revenue, it rarely replaces the stable job base lost from coal. Healthcare and education remain difficult issues. Many rural hospitals operate with shortages of workers, and school districts cope with falling enrollments as families depart. Even so, a few bright spots are noticeable. New workforce training programs in technology and coding have been introduced in Charleston and Morgantown, aimed at preparing residents for industries not tied to extraction. In 2025, West Virginia remains the state facing America's steepest population test. Wisconsin, cheese crown. Which state makes 1/3 of America's cheese? That would be Wisconsin, where dairy farms and processing plants together set new records in 2025. Updated agricultural reports show that the state produced more cheese than at any point in its history, surpassing earlier highs and steadily increasing its lead over other dairy states. The numbers confirm what residents already know: cheese remains not just a product, but a core part of Wisconsin's identity. Cultural ties run deep. Towns across the state hold annual cheese festivals, complete with tastings, competitions, and parades. Local pride is visible even in sports stadiums, where fans wear foam cheese wedges to cheer on their teams. For farms, generational traditions continue, with families passing down both land and dairy practices. Exports ensure that this identity travels far beyond state borders, with Wisconsin cheese shipped across the country and globally. Farming, however, looks very different today than it did a generation ago. Modern technology has transformed how milk becomes cheese. Automated milking systems, climate-controlled barns, and advanced genetics for dairy herds have raised efficiency. Processing facilities rely on precise tracking tools to monitor quality from each shipment of milk to the finished product. These updates allow the industry to meet both record demand and strict standards. The scale of production has a direct economic impact. Billions of dollars flow into Wisconsin's economy through dairy exports, and cheese accounts for the largest share. Rural communities depend heavily on the jobs linked to both farming and large-scale processing plants. By 2025, investments in cold storage, transport logistics, and even international marketing campaigns make cheese the state's most visible economic engine. Climate change complicates this success. Hotter summers and inconsistent rainfall patterns strain both crops for feed and livestock well-being. Farmers now install cooling systems for barns and diversify their fields to support steady production even during droughts. Despite these challenges, the industry maintains its pace by adapting quickly. Wisconsin is also innovating with style. New specialty cheeses gain popularity abroad, with varieties like Alpine blends and artisan blue cheeses reaching markets once dominated by Europeans. While many states produce dairy, Wisconsin's crown as America's cheese leader is stronger than ever in 2025. Wyoming, wind power state. Which coal-heavy state is now turning into a wind giant? The answer is Wyoming, a place once known almost entirely for its dependence on fossil fuels. For decades, coal from Wyoming's Powder River Basin fueled power plants across half the country, supplying electricity far beyond state borders. But in 2025, updated energy reports show that wind turbines across the state's open plains are rising quickly, producing an amount of power that rivals coal revenues and reshapes the state's role in the energy map. The numbers highlight how fast this transition is happening. Wyoming, with its wide landscapes and consistent winds, now contributes a significant share of the nation's renewable electricity. Reports for this year confirm that the state produces more than 15% of all U.S. wind-generated power. In practical terms, turbines spinning across ranchland and remote plateaus are collectively outputting enough electricity to supply millions of homes. These figures are a striking change for a state that long resisted stepping away from its coal economy. Federal investment has also made the difference. New transmission line projects are being built to carry Wyoming's surplus electricity to markets as far away as California and Texas. These massive high-voltage corridors cut across multiple states, giving Wyoming a way to export its renewable energy much like it once shipped coal from the Powder River Basin. The construction of these lines represents one of the biggest infrastructure undertakings in the region in decades. Still, the shift is not without tension. Coal remains an important part of Wyoming's cultural and economic identity, tied to jobs, towns, and generations of families. For many, the sight of turbines outside their communities brings reminders of that change, sometimes seen as opportunity, sometimes as a loss. The debate over balancing old traditions with new growth is visible in local governments and workforce planning alike. From the outside, Wyoming often looks like a sparsely populated state of empty grasslands. Yet in 2025, those same spaces hold hidden national importance. Fields once dominated by coal trains are now dotted with massive turbines, and the energy they produce proves that the state once fueled by coal is capturing the future with wind. These 25 states show how geography in America is always shifting. Borders, climates, and industries are not fixed. They move and adapt with time. By 2025, population growth, rising seas, and renewable energy projects all point to how quickly states change their character. Geography is a living story, not a static image. When you look at a map, it is easy to see only lines dividing land. But those lines represent people, cultures, and decisions shaping entire regions. Each square mile carries futures being written, reminding us that a map is both history and what comes next.